Hey everyone, here we are at the Hoboken Historical Museum here at 13th and Hudson. And we are broadcasting, streaming out Hoboken Talks, as we do twice a month for the most part. We've been doing this show for almost 4 years now, and it's just been a great series of people in Hoboken talking. Look at all these people. There's Vera, Shakira, Bob Foster, all kinds of wonderful people. And please check out our archives on YouTube. That's where we pretty much pay attention to our archives. I know we are streaming out to Facebook and YouTube right now. I'm Rand Hoppy. I am the producer or director or something of this wonderful show, and just thought I'd take care of the introductions today because we're really excited to welcome Mayor David Roberts. And David's going to be interviewed by his son, Chris. So let me push a few buttons here, and then I'll toss it over to Chris and David. One moment.
Hi, everybody.
Yep.
So, like you said, my name's Chris, and I'm here with my dad, David, and we're here with Hoboken Talks. This is exciting. So, let's get right into it, Dad.
Well, before you get into it, I'm very happy that the Yankee game tonight starts at 8 o'clock. I thought we were going to get a lot of bad comments, in as much as we're trampling on the Yankee game. And for all of our dear friends that are celebrating Yom Kippur, we wish you to have a very easy fast and have a good holy day. So all is well with us. So Go ahead, Chris.
So, like we said, David Roberts. Let's start off. So, what part of Hoboken did you grow up in? What streets? And can you kind of tell us the story about your early childhood growing up in town?
Growing up in Hoboken, and we were just looking at some of the old photos of Hoboken during the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and I did not realize, that I thought Hoboken was at the center of the world, and it was a perfect place. Being born and raised, and 522 Garden Street was the actual house where I was born in, where my grandmother lived. Your great-grandmother lived upstairs, and my brother Charlie and I and Grandma lived one floor below. And then in the basement, there was a great aunt who lived there. And then on that block of 5th and Garden Street, everything you could imagine was there in my little world of, being a young person and enjoying Hoboken. There were many different shops and stores and bakeries and delicatessens, and it was much different than today. Today's Hoboken is regal. Today's Hoboken is much different, and in many ways, it's still interesting to me. I love the city, but growing up on 5th and Garden Street with all of our friends, and in those days, Chris, our family, we didn't have the means of a summer home and vacationing at the beach and so forth, but we would spend summer nights in the neighborhood playing ball on the street corner, playing either wiffle ball or box ball, and then, waiting for the Mr. Softy truck to come by. And, it was you would play until you dropped. And I enjoyed that, and it's still, I close my eyes and I could still see, and the buildings are all there. It's still very similar to what it was, but the city itself was a different place, and it's all good. Change is good, and Hoboken has morphed into a much different place. But
So are there any specific parks that you and your friends grew up playing in? Are there any specific games, maybe, things of that nature? What were you doing on 5th and Garden Street?
As you, which is really neat, having Christopher enjoy the same park that I enjoyed, I would be, in Church Square Park a lot, shooting basketball hoops by myself. I would make up crowd noises as I was shooting, if I made
I've
a
done the same
basket.
thing.
And my imagination was incredible. Like it was, if I was riding my bicycle, I was pretending to be a bus driver, making stops all through Church Square Park. I knew just where I learned how to ride a two-wheeler for the first time. I could remember my uncle holding the back, and I was asking your great Uncle Joe, are you still holding the back? Are you still holding it? And he would say, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And then I turned around, I realized that he wasn't, and of course I fell. But Church Square Park was the center of the universe. It's as busy as it's ever been. There's children there. It's clean. It's nice. It's being refit. But that's the park, and it was only a half a block away from 522 Garden Street. So it was right there. And up until the time when your grandmother and my mom bought Umlands, the ice cream parlor, I would work there after school, washing dishes and learning different things, and even learning how to make ice cream. But Uncle Charlie would come looking for me. He knew just where to find me to pull me out of the basketball court to go up and work in Umlands. And, some of friendships that I have to this very day are people that, I met in, having your mother own an ice cream parlor, in a city is not a bad thing. It was great. I met lots of friends. We had lots of fun, and we'll talk more about Umlands and East LA later. But Church Square Park was a great neighborhood park, and I know every little nook and cranny of that place to this very day.
How about schools? So what schools did you attend when you were a young man and, through the years?
Well, I have a couple of funny stories about schools and life and as we get older, but I started out at St. Anne's, and in those days it was its own school. It wasn't yet merged as Hoboken Catholic Academy. It was its own elementary school. And I attended all through St. Anne's. I was actually an altar boy for a couple of years, and that was always interesting, where you would be able to go to school late if you had to serve mass. So I would try to get on the schedule of serving, and I wound up going all through St. Anne's. And, Father Achilles was the pastor of St. Anne's. Father Kelly, some people would refer to him as Father Kelly, but his name was Father Achilles. And years go by fast in life, and I'm sure you recognize how life goes by fast. So here I am in the mayor's office, and Father Achilles came in to see the city, and he wanted to build a senior citizen building. And he was looking at me in the mayor's office, and he said, David, I can't believe it. You're the mayor. You were such a bad boy. I said, Father, that's like horrible. He goes, oh, my heaven. Oh, he used to pull my hair back over here. But I guess I needed it. But it was, I'll never forget that meeting, But we never got to build a senior citizen building, but it was a very good idea. But it proves how fast life goes by, and you close your eyes, even with now, you have two nieces, I have two grandchildren, and, and Emily and Grace, every time I look at them, they're a little taller and they're a little older. And I just want to stop the clock. I want them at their age, and we're going to close our eyes and they'll be graduating high school and boyfriends and whatever. But it was a glorious day when your sister Amanda had Grace and now Emily. But we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned Father Achilles. Were there any other teachers or any other people in school that stood out? Maybe mentors or people you looked up to, things of that nature?
Well, I went to high school, junior high school at Hoboken High School, and a friend of ours and a neighbor, a family friend, who was a public speaking teacher, Mr. Corrado, and he had the greatest sense of humor. He was such an influence on not just myself, so many people. And I think to myself, sometimes I find myself, your Aunt Rita is a friend of the Corrado family and Alex Roger, but she sometimes tells me that my sense of humor is a lot like Mr. Corrado's. The stories that he would tell us in class, and he would embellish them, and I like embellishing stories too, but he would embellish these stories, and it was wonderful. So Mr. Corrado, of course, for many reasons, I have fond memories of him. Junior high school, there was a history teacher, Mr. Collins, and the way he taught history, I immediately took an interest in history, and I'll always remember Mr. Collins as a fantastic educator, and he was a religious man, good man, a very good man, but he made history very enjoyable for me, and I did rattle around in college. You know, I must have taken the longest in history to get some kind of a degree, but I did go to college right after Hoboken High School up at what was then called Jersey City State College. And after a couple of years, I did leave college, only to go back as an adult, you know, to Thomas Edison to put together some type of a degree, just so that my resume looked appropriate to running for mayor of the city. But I did have a professor, and he's still teaching political science at Jersey City University, University of Jersey City, is Dr. Moran. So when I went back to school, here I am in my early 40s. I may have been 41 or 42, and I'm pursuing, you know, and I needed a couple of courses to complete this area. And Dr. Moran, you know, asked me, he said, "Gee, you're a councilman in Hoboken. You're running for mayor." I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know Lourdes Arroyo?" I said, "Oh, my heavens, I'm on the city council with Lourdes." He said, "That's my mother-in-law." I said, "Well, good luck, good news for me, you know." And so to this day, I do know Dr. Moran, and he's still in charge of the political science area there. But you know, it was funny. And another story, you know, when I left school for the first time, I would call, I had my classes arranged so that I would call Grandma to make sure that the lunch was covered. All the people were there working in Umlands, and I would call Granny.
Well, not to interject, but you keep mentioning Umlands, so we might as well.
I talk too much. I'm
No,
sorry.
you don't. That's what it is.
All
It's
right.
Hoboken Talks. So Umlands, this was your mother's ice cream confectionery store?
Yes.
And where was it?
It's right where East LA is, you know, but I'm going to get back to Umlands in a second, but I would call up Grandma, and right from the same, it was a paid telephone, I'd call her up, and every time she would say, "Everything's fine, everything's good," and I'd go to a couple of classes, and then, you know, later in the afternoon we'd get back down to Hoboken. But this one day I called up Grandma, and I said, "Is everything okay?" She goes, "I've had it with this place. I don't want it. If your brother or you have no interest, I've had it." I said, "Mom, I'll be right there. I'll be right there." You know, so I got on this little old beat up Kawasaki motorcycle. It was like 200 cc, whatever it was. It was a little Kawasaki, and left the student union building, got down to Umlands, and left school. And then, I don't know how many years later, till now I'm in my 40s, and I called up Grandma from the same telephone that I left school. I called her up, and I said, "Mom, I'm calling you, you know, from the same place when I left," which was a very nice story. But at any rate, Umlands, getting back to Umlands. So your grandmother, in 1964,
There it is.
well, that is like a 1970s view of Umlands. That's when I was more involved. Growing, Grandma bought it, it had a big neon sign. It was very regal. Many cities had ice cream parlors that, it was before a lot of the franchises had opened up, and cities always had ice cream parlors, soda fountain, confectionaries. And Granny was able to buy that. And of course, I enjoyed that. It was great. I was, by this time, I was working there quite a bit and in charge quite a bit. But East LA, so after all these years as an ice cream parlor confectionery, which was going nicely, Uncle Charlie was serving on a board where some county board, I don't know the schools of technology, but he was a board member. I'm not certain what the board was, but he worked with a fellow that taught culinary arts there.
Now, this is your older brother, Charlie, right?
Right, Uncle Charlie. And so he meets this gentleman, and they concoct this, Mexican restaurant, and we're going to change an ice cream parlor, confectionery into a Mexican restaurant. I was against it. I thought this was crazy, like what? Of course, Grandma agreed, and for a while it went on. But here we are, 42 years later, and you're in charge of that's your baby there. With God's help, Grandma always said that. Grandma always said, "Do never sell this place. There's a comma here that do not sell this. This must be passed on." And she picked out you because you're the foodie. You're the foodie of the family. But there really is, I look at it from across the street and I think, oh my heavens, it's like, what's going on there? And so we were very lucky, and we have been lucky. I've been lucky in business. So.
Thanks for the fun comment, Nora.
Hi, Nora. Nora.
We can't tell.
Am I?
No, that she just wrote. What's the secret recipe
we'll
for
give
the
you the
East
rest.
LA?
We'll give you the recipe to that. We'll give you the rest. We'll give you the recipe. We've those margaritas are very strong, by the way. So we would have on in the early days of East LA, we would have on a Tuesday night a promotion called Margarita Madness, right? Where you remember them, Ram? We would sell margaritas for 99 cents each, as many as you could drink, right? And the place was mobbed. It was packed every Tuesday. We'd have a mariachi band. There was a swell of people outside. I was getting involved in politics at the time, and so we would, Bernie Kenny and in those days, Pat Pasculi and occasionally, Congressman Menendez and others would go down there and we would meet there. And of course, one night, it was just reckless to sell them, so reasonable with no limit. So, someone tripped and, that was it. So our dear friend and attorney, Dennis McAlevey said, "That's the end of Margarita Madness." So since that day, there's been a limit, right, Christopher? There's a limit. There's a limit on how many you could have, and we watch very closely because, as Nora was kind enough to mention, they're quite strong. But that's your thing. But East LA. It is a lucky place, and we have a nice relationship with Symposia Bookstore. We're collaborating on a nice project. We're working with Carmen, and we hope to have something exciting soon. And but the bookstore has been great. Lots of people enjoy going in there, and they meet you, and they meet and Carmen, and it's a good chemistry. And that's another thing that I thought was only going to last a year or two. There's Symposia. So it was People's Photo Store when we bought it. And David and his sister Cheyenne in People's were retiring. And then, of course, we bought People's, the property, to, someday expand East LA. And I had a campaign volunteer, very smart fellow. His name was Jeff. And he approached us and said, gee, well, you're deciding what to do with this property. He was involved with symposia, and we agreed. And I thought this would be, a 1 or 2 year thing. And I don't know, we're in our 20-something year now, but it's all good. It's working out nicely. We all get a certain sense of, pride and appreciation over it. And hopefully, as we look to the future, good things will continue to happen. I believe in that. I believe in karma. You do good for other people, and it has a way of coming back to you. So anyway, I talk too much, Mr.
Oh, stop it.
Roberts.
That's what
Go
this
ahead.
is.
All right. You have to have a commercial.
All right. Well, I guess this is a big talking point. I know personally that you're influenced by two very important women in your life. One being my mother, Anna, and your mother, Anna. Can you tell me about the relationships you had with both of them and the influence and the strength and all the good qualities that they instilled in you?
Christopher, that's a very important question. And it is true that I had the pleasure, my father and my mother and father were divorced, and my dad died very young, and my mom raised both myself and Uncle Charlie, and she was a great tower of strength for a 5-foot-tall woman. She raised the two of us, and worked full time, and she was a great woman, and only for me to marry another Anna, and I remember the first time I laid eyes on your mother, oh my heavens, she there she is, and we owned the Hoboken Daily News at the time, which was, that business was incredible. I mean, Mommy and I, Mommy was a customer service representative at the bank, and I became a customer, and she was so cute that I needed to get to know her better, and there's 7.5 years difference between Mommy and me, closer to 8. And so when I first started, trying to date Mommy, everything was fine, but I had to meet No before your grandfather, before I had permission. And then there was one other caveat: I had to take Aunt Rita too. So it was different, and it was great. But your mother was a great wife, a wonderful mother, and in business and in politics, the most important thing in life is picking a good spouse, finding someone that you could talk to, that listens to you, that gives you support when you need it. Oh my heavens, look how beautiful. Well, that was a beautiful picture of Mommy. But she had great strength, and Christopher, you a great basketball player, my son Christopher here, and he has a great mentor, Mike Muncy. Right? Mincy. And Mike is a great man, and he's an African-American man who mentors kids all the time in basketball, helps them out. And, and we became very close with Mike, especially as you were making your way to these different leagues and you were playing a lot. And for some reason, he gets fired, and he called Mommy on the cell phone. And I remember just where I was, with her, and she goes, "What? What happened? What happened?" And she didn't wait for me to involve myself. She called the necessary, person in charge of this, and she was just so emphatic, "This is wrong," and whatever. And Mike was put back the very next day. So you still have a relationship with Mike, don't you?
A close one. Yeah.
And there are other instances where Anna would insert herself. Not often. Like in a 25-year period of time, I was a councilman and then mayor, 8 elections, 25 years, yikes. But Mommy inserted herself, I don't know, like 7, 8 times in 25 years. But when she did, it was all for good purposes and good reasons. There were other people that she helped very, very much. And I could always remember, our late council person in the 6th Ward, Jen Giattino, lovely woman who passed on way too soon in life. But Jen would always remind me of her first, interaction with Mommy. And, and she had an impression on people, Mommy. She really did. And I looked through the letters. To this very day, I look through the letters that I received after Mommy's passing. And it was, we were privileged. I was privileged to have Mommy in my life for 30 years, and that's the way God wanted it. But at any rate, yeah.
All right, well, now let's talk about how you got into politics.
Yikes.
What were you up to? Did anyone specifically ask you? Was there any outside pressure? Was this something you've dreamt about as a kid?
Okay.
So I guess, how did you get involved in politics? And
there's always like a lot of ingredients that go into decisions in life. It's like, making a good soup or something, there's a lot of different elements that need to before you would jump into it. Before I tell you what was going on in my head, you were approached by a serious candidate, and for your reasons, and you declined. When I was approached, and I had just gotten married. Mommy and I were married 5 or 6 months, and I was still a Hoboken firefighter, and and I was approached to run for city council, and I said, gee, I don't know how to do this, and Mommy said, well, I think you could do it, and I said, really? She goes, no, I think you could do it. I said, you do? And so I was, of course, properly motivated. I had an interest in the city. We were in business. We were both, managing not only East LA Restaurant, but the Hoboken Daily News, and so Mommy was enormously popular, being in the bank, a customer service representative. She was very popular, and I was, very visible in the community. So we had some visibility, and the issues at the time, I was interested in. We were in business. We owned some property, and I had interest in it, and that's how we get involved in politics. And again, I'm thinking this is going to be a one term, whatever. I never thought it would go on for 16 years as a city council person. I felt like, I was 15 years old in the 8th grade. Like I didn't want to be a city council person any longer. And so I had, interest in running for mayor. And I had good friends around me. And of course, our friend and a person that I'm very close to this day is Senator Bernie, and late Maurice Fitzgibbons, and then Jimmy Farina, which I have to talk about Jimmy on 5th and Garden Street, and he had his political club on the corner, and Jimmy is about, 9 years older than I am. So, at the time I was a young guy and he was in his 20s, but he was starting out, the Hoboken Young Democrats were starting out, and it was hilarious. These guys, they're still friends, and but at any rate, we'll get off to that. But I was properly motivated. I ran. We won. Oddly enough, I did not have. I thought for certain I was losing, and I prepared a concession speech, and I didn't prepare remarks if I won. So the polls close, and I was in in the campaign headquarters with your dear friend's uncle, his grandfather, Mr. Dunduno, but I was as shocked as everyone that we had won the election. And then I looked through, my notes, and I had nothing prepared, to talk about winning. So I ad-libbed, thanking everyone. And that night, the telephone rings. Like right after, we win this election, the telephone rings. And it was the Indian man who purchased the Hoboken Daily News, Mr. Chuda. And what a nice man he was. And he owned all these newsstands, the Garden State News. He owned all of the newsstands in the Port Authority building. And very successful. He owned hotels in Myrtle Beach. And he wanted to own the Hoboken Daily News in the worst way, and I wouldn't sell it. He wanted it, I wouldn't sell it. Then finally we win this election, and Mr. Chuda calls on the phone. And Angelo, there's a newspaper picture of Angelo handing me the telephone. I said, "Who is it?" He goes, "I don't know who it is. Take the call." So I get on, it's Mr. Chuda, and he said, "Oh, we're happy you won the election. We're so happy. Now you have no time to worry about the Hoboken Daily News." So the very next day, my uncle, your great Uncle Joe, Mr. Chuda had his office in the Port Authority building, New York City, like on the second floor. He had people there. It was an incredible sight, counting money, like in machines. It was like, oh my heavens. So we went over to the Hoboken Daily News. Over to the Port Authority, and there was Mr. Chuda, and we agreed. We agreed to sell the Hoboken Daily News, and and that went on for a long time. Mr. Chuda, Mommy and I became familiar with his family. We went to several beautiful Indian weddings. They are very extravagant, celebrations of days, of celebrating. But it was a very nice moment in our lives. And some of those people that I met, later in life, I still would keep in contact with. But so, yeah.
Yeah, so next I wanted to ask if there was any funny stories about when you were the mayor, but as I'm looking, I'm thinking of a story that I thought of myself. Not so funny, definitely heartwarming, but there was a time when I was little, and we were all eating dinner together, me, my brother, my sister, you and Mom, and you had to leave. You had to go marry a couple.
Oh, gosh.
But what I heard was
gosh.
that you were leaving to go marry somebody else. Now tell me about this. This was a funny story.
Well,
I must have been one.
I remember the couple. It was the first week that I was mayor of the city, and one of the nice official duties of a mayor is you officiate weddings. You officiate the marriage of couples. So I would always have a few remarks prepared and whatever. But that night, we were all eating, and I was getting dressed and leaving the house, and you had asked Mommy, "Where's Daddy going?" And Mommy said, "Daddy's going to marry someone." And then you got very upset. And you said, "I want Daddy to stay married to you,"
Yes.
And so she said, Mommy said, no. He's just going to perform the marriage ceremony. He's coming back in a little while. And the couple, the Bonacore, David Bonacore and his beautiful wife, they were the first couple that we officiated. And they're a lovely couple. And to this day, whenever I run into them, all these years later, we always talk about that. We reminisce how, oh God, Christopher thought. But we went on to marry so many couples, oh my heavens. One time we had a reunion at Amanda's restaurant. We had our secretary go through all of the couples and invite them all, and we had them all in. I forgot how many people, but there was a large number of couples. And to this day, I don't know whether one gentleman comes in the restaurant or he met up with your brother David in real estate or whatever, but there's still there's lots of couples that we were lucky enough to play a little role in the beginning of their lives together. And but talking about Amanda's for a second, Eugene and I, as I worked with Bernie in developing lots of good legislation, things that got done in Hoboken, this clock tower that's right behind your hat, that was the, Bernie and I set forth on that, not knowing we would be able to get it rebuilt. It started 15 years prior with a postcard. Rand has the postcard of the old terminal with the clock tower, and Uncle Joe always thought it was horrible not having the terminal without its clock tower. And so Bernie was in for breakfast one morning, and I said, why can't we try to do this? And, okay, let's try to do it. And then years go by, and the next thing now I'm in the mayor's office, and we had a much better platform to lobby getting the clock tower built back up there. But he became very influential as majority leader in New Jersey, and he had influence in the right places and funding sources in the right spot. And Hoboken, being where we were, we were able to get the clock tower built. And I have to say, I wish it was lit properly. I wish not only with the bulbs that are in there, they don't have the right wattage, and it should be lit from the outside. And I wish that we would take better care of that. New Jersey Transit should take better care of that. And it should be lit from the outside as well. It's a beautiful piece of architecture, and it symbolizes our city. And it's now featured in many movies, and many different people use it as a symbol of Hoboken. And we should treat it with the certain dignity and respect that it deserves. And there are things that I would like to volunteer to do, and that would be one. And I wish the view corridors would be preserved. When you come down what was then Ferry Street, it wouldn't be harmful to have that name returned to Ferry Street, not Observer Highway, named after the Jersey Observer newspaper. That's long since became the Jersey Journal, and now it's no longer even in existence. The government in Hoboken, I believe in the 1930s, changed the name of Ferry Street to Observer Highway. And it really should go back to Ferry Street. And that clock tower, the view corridor, even from Jersey City, you could see it. It stands right in the middle of the roadway. And I hope that the new office buildings are not going to block that view. It's an important view. And of course, we all lamented over the tearing down of the old records building that was right there on Observer Highway, making way for some pump, and I think that, there are many cities that would have put up a better fight about leaving that beautiful building there. It's one of the oldest buildings. It's now gone, but preserving these places. Hoboken is blessed to have this terminal, and it's spectacular. And Hoboken is blessed to have all of this mass transportation that is here in Hoboken. And I could remember as a young council person, Stan Eckstadt coming to Hoboken. He was the principal planner of Battery Park, Cooper Eckstadt. And Stan Eckstadt, he was just enamored over Hoboken. He said, this city, with all of its mass transportation, you have heavy rail, light rail, ferry service, bus service, path service. This is $1 billion worth of mass transportation is already here, and we're not utilizing it. And then from there, the discussions came about of what's the best utilization for this great mass transportation hub that we already have here in Hoboken. What would be appropriate for a city that is blessed with all of this infrastructure already here? And then there were various plans that came about and different struggles, and I don't want to get into all of those things. When Hoboken morphed from being an industrial base, where all of that industry, moved to either Florida or then to South America, and Hoboken lost all of its tax base in the 1970s into the 80s. They were very, very difficult times to just pay bills in this city. We lost 60% of the tax base moved. And Mayor Pasculli at the time put up a tremendous fight and effort to keep Maxwell House Coffee open. And I was part of that. I could remember, and Pat lobbied the federal elected officials, state elected officials. They were granted tax breaks, water bill concessions. We did everything. Pat did everything to try to keep Maxwell House Coffee, open in Hoboken. And I could remember how devastating it was for him. He loved the blue-collar waterfront, sense of Hoboken. His dad, Mr. Pasculi, worked on the piers, and there was a real connection for him to try to maintain that. But when Maxwell House Coffee, and the president came to Hoboken and told us, look, we're sorry, but we're moving. We're moving. That was the day that Hoboken needed to turn the page from an industrial city that had warehouses, factories, and we had many, where it had to, we needed to reinvent the tax base and the waterfront overlooking Manhattan with all of that mass transportation, with people like Stan Eckstadt, who and of course we argued over what should it look like. Community groups like the Fund for a Better Waterfront participated. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we didn't. But having a public waterfront was the right thing to do. But you could understand the city's government when you lost all your tax base and you were very anxious to get something approved. And it wasn't where the buildings were, but the Fund for a Better Waterfront, Ron Hine, I was able to look back and say, you know what? I think you're right, that having the buildings on across the street and having all of the waterfront parks and walkways as public parks and walkways, esplanades, is better. And I think there are European cities that have a similar characteristics where all of the waterfront is for everyone. It's public. It's not privatized. So we made our way. And again, time goes by. I could remember Craig Whitaker. Ron introduced me to Craig Whitaker, and he had what was called the blanket test. And I said, what the heck is this blanket test? And you could truly understand the public waterfront if you could take a blanket and stretch it across in a public area and have a picnic, and that's stuck in my head all these years. But Craig does fine work. He's a planner, and Ron is still at it, and even though Hoboken has really turned the corner, there are still elements of the waterfront that Ron is trying to connect, and to that extent, it's all good. It's all good.
So I guess still talking about time you in public office and you just becoming the mayor. I know that's a hard topic for a lot of people. Many lives lost. But can you just kind of tell me your remembrance of September 11th, 2001?
Yeah.
And what it was like for you? And
So it was a Tuesday morning, and I would walk to City Hall, from 6th and Hudson. I'd walk down Washington Street. And, I would start walking. I know it's a little bit after 8 o'clock. I'd be walking down Washington Street. And that Tuesday morning, it was a beautiful day. The sky was as blue as could be, which is, many people have said this to me as well, that when the weather becomes near perfect, instead of just enjoying the perfect day, it brings you back to that day, because it was a perfect day. The sky was blue. It was a beautiful day. But as I get toward 3rd and Washington Street and then 2nd and Washington Street, I see people looking up. And I didn't understand what was, going on. Then I get in front of City Hall and I see a group of 6 or 7 people all looking up. They're looking up. So I asked, what's going on? They said a plane just hit one of the towers at the World Trade Center. And so I then decided to walk up to Pier A Park and to just take a look as everyone else was walking up there. And the people that I was walking with all thought it was a small plane that may have, inadvertently hit one of the towers. It wasn't what actually occurred. And so I get to Pier A Park, and I'm standing at the very edge. Fred Beto was there, our director of economic development. And as we see, the fire is getting intense. It's getting bigger and intense. And then over our right shoulder to the south, we see the second plane very low over Jersey City, but it seemed so close. It seemed so close. And the plane is low, and I was standing with Eugene Flynn of Amanda's, and Eugene and I were there, and we were looking up, and Eugene thought it may be like a water tanker plane or something, like where it's going to attempt to extinguish the fire. But the plane ducks around the first building, and then you see the second explosion. Then for sure I knew this is a very serious, horrible catastrophe. So I make my way back, to the mayor's office, and by this time CNN was there with cameras, and they wanted to go into the mayor's office and to and I said, yeah, they couldn't get through the Holland Tunnel, so they came to Hoboken. They wanted to be a lookout and broadcast, and by this time the buildings, at least the first building, is now falling, and then thereafter the second building fell. And it was horrible. And Hoboken, established the state of New Jersey was an emergency. The emergency, management group came in. They were setting up, places where they thought there was going to be, casualties, of which God help us, the people there were incinerated, and there were people being ferried across, and then they had set up areas where they were being decontaminated. The fire department was there, the volunteer ambulance group was there. Hundreds of Hoboken people were volunteering. Hundreds were there at the terminal. And, we were just greeting people and seeing if we could help, distributing whatever they may need. And it was a horrible, horrible day. And then thereafter, so many Hoboken residents lost their lives that day. Of course, 3,000 people were killed immediately, and out of the 3,000, there were, 56 Hoboken residents, young people that went to work. They were Hoboken residents. They loved living in Hoboken, and it was so horrible as their families were coming into town, putting up photographs of their loved ones to see where they were, if anyone's seen them, and there were people in the mayor's office that really did a great job. Suzanne Hetman, Jeff Curtis was wonderful, and Lori Worm was another minister. She worked on meeting with families right away. They would bring in these families right away and be there with them. It was all it was all unbelievable, but. And then the pile that was there, and you, Christopher, as a very young boy with John Patrick, 2 or 3 days later, when it was up on the waterfront, and a New York Times photographer took a photograph of you as a little boy and John Patrick from behind. We still have that photograph. And trying to make sense of all of this. And there were all cards that were along, little cards that children would write out and leave them there. But it was just a horrific day for the world. And of course, Hoboken had the first view of those beautiful. I loved the World Trade Center buildings. They were part of as a little boy, as they were digging the original foundation, there's a photograph of me looking into the into the slurry, like I guess along the slurry wall, and my Uncle Joe took a photograph. I still have that photograph before the buildings were built. But as the buildings were built, they were a visceral part of our atmosphere. I mean, there they are. They're there. They're huge. They're big. They represented New York. They represented the United States. And many people felt they should just be put back. I suppose I love the new building now, the Freedom Tower, but I would have liked to see those two buildings get put back. But life goes on. Change is inevitable. The building is great. The design is great. I go over there. I love the transportation system there. But our administration, we were very new. In July, we met with Neil Levin. He was then the executive director of the Port Authority, and Cassandra Wilday and I and Fred Beto and I forgot who else. We went over to New York to meet the executive director. This was like in the middle of July, and the Port Authority agreed to the requests that we made. We wanted a project, a build-out that was slightly smaller, but we were asking for the same revenue stream, which was somewhat unfair, but because the economy had gotten better, the Port Authority was able to grant us that request. So we wound up with, I don't know, maybe 500,000 square feet smaller project, but the revenue streams were staying in place. And, of course, Mr. Levin was killed on September 11th, which was only, 5 or 6 weeks after that meeting. And when we cut the ribbon of the walkway from Pier 8 Park down to where Sinatra Park is, there was a stretch of the walkway that the ribbon was being cut on it. The person that was representing the Port Authority was some executive that was there that wasn't, in the World Trade Center when it was struck by the buildings, but went on to say that he was aware of the meeting that Neil Levin had with Cassandra, myself, and other people that were there that day. And he said the Port Authority is standing by that agreement, and which was a wonderful, honorable gesture, that the Port Authority made, to this city of Hoboken. But, here we are all these years later, and the years go by quickly. But anyway, that was September 11th, but it was a horrible day. But anyway, yeah.
Are there any other stories when you were the mayor that you would like to bring up that you had on topic, or
Stories
funny ones maybe? Or?
There was one time where I started getting overly confident about speaking publicly, and so I would get, at the beginning of the day, I would get, notes on whatever it is that we had to do. And I'm not going to mention any names, but the business community was honoring a very important person up at Stevens in the big room. I forgot the room it was, but I was walking up there, and I was with Bernie, and I wasn't reading my notes. I just knew that, I could handle this. I'm going to be able to do a good job with this. So we walk in. I get introduced. The guest of honor is there with his family looking up at the stage, and I completely black out. Like I'm looking out, and I could have been a million miles away, and all I hear is Bernie Kenny's laugh, which he has a very distinguished laugh when he, and I hear out of this crowded room, and thank heavens I was able to regain my footing, and I offered the proper remarks to such a wonderful person. I'm not mentioning names who it was, but I regained my footing. But to this day, it's a very lonely place when you're in a public setting and you forget what it is that you're talking about. But Bernie and I accomplished many things. The hospital, he was able to get the funding, not the funding, with the city of Hoboken passed a bond issue, but the legislation needed for a city to buy its hospital, and we were able to do that. And of course the clock tower, and a lot of good things that, we were able to do. All those waterfront agreements, you needed to pass the legislature. But having a good partner, is always good, and I was very fortunate to have, Bernie as my partner. Politically, Jimmy, of course, was a great influence, Farina, in my life. He's funny as could be, and he was a great cook. He's a foodie as well, Christopher, and he could make great meatloaf, by the way. But those were the days, the stories. There's so many. I don't know which one is distinguished from the other, but there was I'm going to tell you this story, and I mean this with all kindness. And I mean it in a very positive way. But Hoboken lost a great guy. Ed Chirac was a Frank Sinatra aficionado. He actually, sometimes I think Ed thought he was Frank Sinatra. So Mommy and I get invited to go to this small stage location, actually where Sinatra was born, like that block. There was a small place where Ed set up a small stage, and had a microphone there. He had a tuxedo on, and we were invited to a performance, which we thought was a performance of someone singing Sinatra music. So Mommy and I went, and we're sitting there, and it was just the two of us and like two senior citizens, and there was Ed in a tuxedo, and he was singing these Sinatra songs, and it was a little bit surreal. And so as I'm sitting there looking up at Ed, Mommy's leg was shaking. I could see she's starting to laugh, but she's holding it in. And as what happens in grammar school, when one person laughs, it's contagious. So I'm sitting there as well, trying to be respectful, and I'm like, the two of us are like about to erupt, and thank God we made it through. It was great. Ed sang a few songs, and and I offered remarks to Ed and to the two other people in the room, and off we went. But the minute we got outside, your mother just let out like, oh my God, it was great. But there were many nice things. And Ed, and I want to say that Ed was a great friend and a good man. And he brought more good attention to Frank Sinatra and his legacy, and deservingly so. And Ed was another interesting. Hoboken had so many interesting people, like they were just like interesting. And it's very difficult. You mention names, and Mayor Vizzetti had a brother who was a great Yankee fan. And I never knew, and his name was Yankee Bob. Like, I never knew that was Mayor Vizzetti's brother. I learned of this at Mayor Vizzetti's wake, at his funeral. And I never knew that, Bob was, because I was at church, and I said, oh my heavens, look, there's Yankee Bob. And the person I was with said, yeah, that's Mayor Vizzetti's brother. But it's all good, and it was all, we made it through, and we tried to keep our sense of humor along the way. Oh, one other thing about Jim Farina and his Democratic Club, and a person that had influence on me. There was a gentleman that was the 6th Ward council person many years ago, many years before I was the council person. And his name was John Palmieri, very distinguished man, very distinguished Mr. Palmieri. And, he had a certain presence about him, well-dressed, well-spoken. And I was 28 years old, and so I was a young guy. And Jimmy would cook Saturday mornings in his Democratic Club, and Mr. Palmieri joined for one of these Saturday lunches. So he asked that I sit next to him, and I did. And Mr. Palmieri, to this very day, I remembered what he said. He goes, David, he said, politics is like square dancing. When the music stops, you never know who your partner's going to be. So stay friends with everybody. And I carried that all through my time. I was, there were things with Mayor Vizzetti's administration I supported. I was part of the fragile coalition of 5 council people that got many things done, the important stuff. But you try to stay friends with people. And when you disagree with someone without being, don't be mean about it. You could disagree. You could have an honest disagreement with someone, but don't be personal. When you point the finger at someone, don't forget there's only 3 pointing back at you. Your grandmother taught me that very, very early on. Don't be in the business of accusing people of things or pointing fingers or showing someone up. If you have to disagree, disagree. And, we went all through life, all through our political time, and, we did the best we could.
Well, I think that was pretty great, right? I think we should end with a lesson, and I thought that was nice.
Oh, my heavens, look at this
is
group.
the family.
Look at this group.
Right here,
Here
right?
we are.
Me,
Here
my,
we are.
my brother David,
Now we're
my
missing
sister
Morgan
Amanda.
here. We're missing Morgan. So now David is now engaged to Annalisa, and she's lovely, lovely, lovely young lady. And Christopher is now very seriously living with his college dear friend Morgan, and I love Morgan. And the greatest thing about Morgan is her family owns Dairy Queens, so that is a big hit. And behind my daughter Amanda is Patrick, my son-in-law. He's a wonderful person. Anyone who's gone to St. Peter's Prep, as you did, Christopher, would know there's a certain way that those guys that go to prep, they carry themselves in a certain way. And Father Rosado was a good mentor to Pat, but Pat comes from, a long list, a family of lawyers, and we're very lucky to have Pat in our family, and there we are. And of course, I leave with thinking, of Mommy. She created, a nice circumstance, and many of the things she did to the public library. Now Amanda is on that the board, and I'm happy that my daughter carries on where Anna was part of it. And there's Emily and Grace. There they are. So, well, anyway, thank you very much for having us, and I hope I was interesting. So.
And thank you for all the commenters saying hello and wishing us encouragement.
Thanks. Thank you. Hi, Bill.
All right. Let me just,
Oh, the house. Oh boy, we missed talking about that.
okay.
That's up.
Let me push this button. And I'll thank you guys so much for your time, and Mayor Roberts for your memories. It's been really, and all the comments have been wonderful. And Chris, thanks so much for stepping up and
Thank you.
doing the task there. It was really cool. And I'm going to move into some of our final slides here. We've got some more Hoboken Talks coming. We're going to be talking to Jeff Trupiano soon enough, maybe in a couple of weeks. And after that, Joe Pantoliano is going to make an appearance. So we're really looking forward to those 2 shows. Stay tuned to our YouTube channel and a Facebook feed to learn more about what's happening with Hoboken Talks. We definitely need to thank the New Jersey Historical Commission for their support for this show, and to the museum in general. They are a great organization that really appreciates what we do, so we appreciate what they do. This is the Shipyard Circle. This is the museum's top donors. You can see some wonderful names there of people who support us, and also our museum trustees who help steer the direction of the museum. But we of course we thank everybody for visiting, coming to our events, and so on. Ooh, I we'd like to thank Iron State. They are our landlord here, and we thank them every day. We pay $1 a year for our rent, and they are just wonderful and generous to us for doing that. Upstairs, we are recording this show right now in the upper gallery where we have the Jackie Post show. We all stop down here. You'll stop too. It's filled with some really great street photography, skate decks, and a little video loop as well. We had a great reception on Sunday, and the show goes through the 9th, so November 9th. So come on by to the museum and check out Jackie's show. Downstairs in the main gallery, we have the Hoboken Meadows, which is going to run through the end of the year. Come and learn about when Hoboken was almost an island, but surrounded by swamp and creeks and marshlands and so on. A wonderful exhibit curated by Holly Metz with some eye-opening photos that you need to see. So come on by. We're at 1301 Hudson Street. We'd like to please give us a thumbs up on our video today. Subscribe to our channel. And so on. It does help us get out into the algorithm and into people's feeds. So we really appreciate that, if you would. And so Hoboken Talk, that's us, Hoboken Talks. I'm Rand Hoppy here at the Hoboken Historical Museum. Again, Chris Roberts, Mayor David Roberts, thanks so much. It was a really great show, and we'll be back for more soon.